Imagine a night so silent that the sound of the wind feels like a gentle whisper, daring only to pass through the cracks of ancient stones. In a corner of rural Europe, now rarely mentioned on maps, stands a large gray stone building, alone, surrounded by fields long abandoned. That building is an old church, but its main doors are locked tight, as if refusing any light that tries to enter. No bells ring, no congregation lines the stone steps. Only silence encircles its thick walls, a silence that seems to have been part of it for centuries. People in the nearest village often say that this is the place where time stops, where anyone's steps approaching it feel heavier, as if the ground itself is trying to hold them back. If you stand before its doors, you'll see carvings now fading, lines once shaped by skilled hands centuries ago, but now worn away by age. No one truly knows when those doors were last opened, but everyone knows one thing for certain: that this church has been locked for 300 years, since a night remembered only in half-whispered tales. Tales never told in full, as if some part is deliberately left blank for imagination to fill. That night, according to the elders, the sky was starless, and a thick fog descended from the hills, carrying a biting cold. From that day onward, there were no masses, no prayers uttered inside. Only the doors remained shut, with iron locks whose rust resembled veins that no longer carried life. Those born and raised in that village learned to accept the presence of this church as part of the landscape. Like a dead tree in the middle of a field, or an old well that no longer yields water, its presence was never questioned too deeply, perhaps because they felt that some secrets are safer left buried within stone. In the morning, when the sun has just touched the treetops on the hills, its thin rays rarely touch the church's walls directly, as if even the light is reluctant to disturb its long slumber. Wild grass grows tall in its front yard, hiding old gravestones whose names can no longer be read. From a distance, the building seems like part of the natural landscape, not something made by human hands. Birds rarely perch on its roof, and if they do, they never stay long. Sometimes, in autumn, the wind carries dry leaves swirling around the stone steps before settling in tiny, untouched corners. There is no sign of life, only the impression that this place holds something it does not wish to reveal. The old people in the village tell that before it was locked, this church was the heart of village life, a place where people came not only to worship, but also to find warmth from the great hearth inside. There was once a large bronze bell in its tower whose sound could be heard as far as the next valley. But that bell was silenced on the same night the church doors were locked. Some say its final sound was off-key, like a cry broken halfway. From that moment, everything related to the church seemed to freeze. No one cleaned the yard, no one lit candles at the altar, no one repaired the roof, even as moss and lichen began to take over. Gosh. It was as if the entire village silently agreed to leave it as it was. Gosh. Those born decades after the event grew up with the habit of not asking why. Only children sometimes dared to play in its yard, though they usually came home earlier than planned, with vague reasons such as the air being too cold or a feeling of being watched. For some, the church was merely an old building with no relevance. But for those sensitive to old tales, the place was like an empty vessel filled with echoes of the past. Echoes that never truly disappeared and simply waited to be heard again by ears patient enough to listen. The year most often mentioned in those stories is 1720, though no official documents truly confirm it. Most of the remaining church records were destroyed in a warehouse fire in the neighboring town decades later. So whatever is known now is merely fragments of memory passed down by word of mouth. This small village lay on the edge of an ancient forest, stretching as far as the eye could see, where towering oak and beech trees seemed to touch the clouds. Its path was narrow, only wide enough for a single cart, and in the rainy season it would turn into thick mud. In those days, this area was considered remote, even for traveling merchants accustomed to long routes. They often chose easier paths, so the village rarely received news from the outside. Yet, in that isolation, life went on. Small plots of land were tilled manually with hoes and wooden plows. Children ran through the meadows, and mothers hung linens on ropes stretched between two poles. From the descriptions of old storytellers, the atmosphere was peaceful, though the air always carried a faint scent of damp earth that never truly disappeared, as if the forest exhaled its breath into every corner of the village. Then came the news that changed everything. A plague that had claimed thousands of lives in port cities began creeping inland. This plague, which some referred to as the continuation of an old curse, spread quickly, even in places with no direct connection to overseas trade. Some swore they saw a cloth merchant from the city carrying bundles wrapped in worn fabric, and shortly after, houses began shutting their doors earlier than usual. The news spread like the wind, but not only through words at night. The sound of harsh coughing and faint screams could be heard from houses whose lamps went dark earlier than before. Within weeks, the village's atmosphere changed. The weekly market, once lively, became deserted, and people began avoiding each other's gaze, as if even eyes could be a bridge for the disease. It was then that the church began to play an important role, at least. That is what some believed, because within its thick walls, they thought there was protection. Whether from a religious source or from something more mysterious that was never openly explained. Yet, whatever truly happened inside, its door was eventually locked for a length of time no one imagined would last 3 centuries. The location of the church at the center of this story lies at the southern edge of the village, right where the dirt road leading to the forest begins to slope upward slightly before turning east. The building is not particularly large, consisting only of a main hall with a sloping roof covered in clay tiles, whose color has faded to a brownish gray. According to storytellers, the stones used to build its walls were taken from a river about 2 miles away, carried on horse-drawn carts for days. Its main door is made of thick oak, adorned with large wrought iron nails whose heads are now rusted. There are narrow windows on both sides of the building, which in the past may have served to let in light, but also to keep watch for approaching danger. The small tower has no bell, and this has long been a subject of whispers, for a church without a bell is considered unusual, as if it stood not to call people to worship, but for some other quieter purpose. From the forest side, this church is almost invisible unless one stands in an open clearing. as trees and thick undergrowth grow densely around it. In autumn, fallen leaves cover the ground like a carpet of gold and red, and in winter, thin snow often clings to the gaps in the stone walls, giving the impression that the building has long been abandoned. Yet before the time of the plague, this church was frequently used not only for Sunday services, but also for village meetings to discuss harvests, land divisions, or even to resolve disputes. All that changed when rumors of disease began to spread. People began to avoid gathering in enclosed spaces, even though their faith told them that a house of worship was a place of refuge. But there were also other stories that this church, on certain nights, was used for something not recorded in Scripture or official records. No one knows for certain. But some storytellers claim their ancestors once saw candles lit at odd hours and heard low singing from behind closed doors. Whether it was prayer or something else, no one could be sure. What is certain is that when the plague reached its peak, the church door was sealed shut, and only a few claimed to have seen who entered or left afterward. The year when the plague began to spread in this village is not clearly recorded in official books, but from the stories handed down. Many say it happened in the mid-17th century, when summer seemed longer than usual and rain fell less often, the dry air causing dust to easily rise and scatter. At that time, this village was not a major trading center, but a remote place that relied on produce from the small surrounding fields, along with forest goods brought home by hunters and firewood gatherers. The houses were made of pine and stone, with thatched roofs replaced every few years. The roads were nothing more than compacted earth, and in summer, dust from the ground clung to clothes, hair, and even to the surface of bread left uncovered too long on the table. Villagers were never accustomed to the arrival of strangers, so news of people falling ill in the big cities felt like distant tales that could never reach here. But in reality, disease always finds a way. Some say the first carrier of the plague was a traveling merchant who stopped here to sell cloth and metal tools, a thin man with sunken eyes who coughed all day. He stayed at the home of an old widow, living not far from the church, and within days, the woman fell ill, followed by her children, then her neighbors, until half the village began to lock themselves inside their homes. The plague revealed itself not only through high fever and exhaustion, but also through black swellings on the neck and underarms, which filled those who saw them with dread. A metallic, bloody scent began to linger in the air, and the village dogs grew restless, barking endlessly at night. At that time, the church still functioned as a gathering place to pray for salvation. But some villagers began to doubt, for after every meeting, there were always reports that one or two attendees later fell sick. No one knew for certain whether prayer brought healing or merely hastened the spread of the disease. But fear had already begun to replace the sense of togetherness. And when the death toll rose, the village elders held one last meeting inside the church. A meeting said to have been accompanied by sudden rain that fell despite a previously clear sky. After that meeting, the church doors were locked with chains, and there were no more services, no more singing, only silence wrapping the place for centuries. The days after the church was locked became a time difficult to recall without feeling again the weight of the air back then. as if every gust of wind carried unspoken bad news. The fields that once provided life began to be abandoned. Weeds growing among withered crops, and crows circling above the village like omens understood only by those willing to see. Children who usually ran along the dirt paths now only peered from behind windows, their eyes gazing outside with curiosity mixed with fear. Some families chose to seal their doors and windows tightly, even nailing boards over them, hoping that by doing so, the disease would not find a way inside. Meanwhile, the church bell that once rang regularly in the mornings and evenings no longer sounded, its chain beginning to rust in the damp air. Those still able to move started burying the dead in an empty plot behind the village. Without ceremony, only a short prayer uttered hastily before the bodies were covered with earth. They no longer dared to touch or look too long, as if even a glance could spread the illness. At night, the village grew utterly silent, with only the sounds of insects and occasionally the wind scraping across the roof tiles. Yet some swore they had heard footsteps around the church, heavy steps echoing between the stone walls, though no one dared to investigate. There was also a story that the candle on the church's main altar remained burning for months after the doors were locked, its glow faintly visible through the cracks of the stained glass windows, though no one knew who lit it or why it never went out. This tale became part of the inherited mystery told by grandparents to their grandchildren in winter, when snow blocked the roads out of the village and everyone was forced to stay indoors. Though no one truly knew the truth, the story lived on like a long breath that never ended, wrapping the village in a curiosity that never fully faded. Time moved slowly in the village after the church doors were sealed, as if the sun hesitated to fully rise and dusk always came sooner than expected. Some of the remaining villagers with enough strength tried to endure through simple tasks, like repairing the roof or tidying farming tools, yet most simply sat by the hearth, staring at the embers as they slowly dimmed. Each morning, the cold air carried a scent difficult to describe, a mixture of damp earth, rotting wood, and something more elusive, like traces of incense drifting from the past. Some said it was the lingering aroma of prayers that had clung to the church walls, refusing to fade even as time marched on. From a distance, the church still stood solid, its old stone walls holding secrets too heavy to reveal. No one dared to approach too closely. Yet at times, those passing along the road beside it claimed to feel a piercing chill even under the bright midday sun. Children were forbidden to play nearby, not only because of the illness, but also due to tales that whispers could be heard from within, calling out to anyone who lingered too long at the door. Some elders swore they had seen shadows moving behind the stained glass, figures unrecognizable, tall and rigid like statues, but disappearing the moment they were approached. Yet all such testimonies were spoken of in low tones at kitchen tables, while making sure the door was locked and curtains were drawn tight. No one wished to challenge that lingering mystery, for in this small village, belief and fear often walked hand in hand, each reinforcing the other, like two sides of a great door that had long remained unopened. Day after day passed in the same pattern, the air filled with caution, footsteps taken with care, and eyes always avoiding the direction of the church, as though keeping a distance was the only way for life, however faint, to endure. The nights in that village held a different kind of silence, like a thick blanket that muffled sounds and hid all movement. The wind that drifted softly carried faint murmurs from the trees, yet seemed to deliberately avoid passing through the church walls. The moon was rarely full, and when its light fell upon the churchyard, the shadows appeared far too long for the size of the building itself. Some villagers claimed they had woken in the middle of the night to the faint chime of a bell, as if from a great distance. But when they opened their windows, nothing awaited them except the biting cold. The houses near the church were the quickest to be abandoned, even by those who once believed there was nothing to fear. Rumors spread that the great wooden door had once shuttered by itself one night without a breath of wind or the touch of a human hand. And since then, no one dared walk past its front after dark. On the outskirts of the village, in the scattered small houses, stories grew slowly like a fire burning in the hearth, offering warmth, yet keeping caution alive. The elders always ended their tales with the same line that the church was waiting for something, whether it be a person or the right time to open its doors again. Until that moment arrived, all anyone could do was speculate, letting curiosity mingle with fear, like the fog that blanketed the village each dawn. Even the animals seemed to understand, for no dog dared bark toward that building, and birds always circled high above, avoiding its dark roof. Night after night, the village felt trapped in a long pause, waiting for something that never truly came. Morning in that village did not bring the cheer found in other villages. Sunlight did break through rooftops and cast a soft gleam on the leaves. Yet there was an odd undertone in the air that never faded. From a distance, the old church appeared as though it were a natural part of the landscape, as if it had stood there before the village itself was born. But as one drew nearer, the warmth of the morning seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold that seeped deep into the bones. The grass in the churchyard often appeared wetter than elsewhere, even after the sun had climbed high. Some children had once tried to play there, but they always returned pale-faced, telling unclear stories of footsteps inside despite the door being firmly locked. Farmers whose fields faced the church claimed they often felt watched, especially when working alone. More than once, they stopped mid-task just to stare at the building, trying to catch some movement behind its dusty windows. Around the great wooden door, the faded carvings showed shapes hard to identify, a blend of religious symbols and images never found in any prayer book. Small scratches, whether made by human hands or by time, formed random patterns that, when stared at too long, stirred an unsettling feeling. Those who passed by in the morning tended to quicken their pace, as if eager to escape the shadow that seemed to stretch out from the building. Though no one dared say it aloud, everyone knew that the church was more than just an old structure. It was something waiting, something holding a secret too heavy to be spoken of under sunlight. By midday, the sunlight that should have warmed the village only made every detail of the church clearer, and this clarity brought greater unease. From afar, the stone walls looked like skin covered in deep cracks that seemed to hide something within. The bell in its tower had not rung for years, yet birds refused to perch there, choosing instead to circle the roof as if avoiding something unseen. The path leading to the front door was blanketed in thick moss, a sign that no one had truly approached for many years. In the tall, narrow windows, the faded stained glass still cast a strange light when struck by the sun. Some villagers swore they had seen that light pulse slowly, like the breath of a living creature. The wind that swept around it carried an odor hard to define, not entirely rotten, yet not fresh either, like a blend of decaying old wood and something far more ancient. Whenever footsteps approached from the village, the air near the church seemed to change, as if it were silently holding its breath. Those who had stood long enough near the door claimed to hear a faint sound, not from inside, but as if from deep beneath the ground under the church. It was not the sound of a human, nor exactly that of an animal, but a slow, heavy, rhythmic pattern, making anyone who heard it feel as though they were being watched by something that never blinked. The village had accepted that the church was not only locked physically, but also by something far older than the iron key that bound it shut. Evening brought a change in light that made the church seem even heavier, as if the shadows around it were pressing in from every direction. The sun sank behind the hills, and its golden color faded into a cold bluish gray. At such hours, the sounds from the village slowly faded away, leaving only the whisper of wind threading through the trees. The old trees surrounding the church swayed slowly, their branches creaking as if burdened by secrets they had heard for far too long. The grass in the churchyard swayed lightly, yet its movement was out of sync with the wind, as though following another rhythm, one unseen. From a distance, the large wooden door that was locked looked like a mouth clamped tightly shut, refusing to speak a single word about what it had witnessed. Some villagers had tried approaching at dusk, only to feel a faint vibration in the ground beneath their feet, as if something moved far below the surface. No one could explain where that vibration came from, yet whenever it happened, the sky above the church seemed slightly darker than anywhere else in the village. The elders who still remembered their ancestors. Stories hinted that dusk was the time when the veil between the human world and something else grew very thin. They whispered that this church might have been built not only as a place of worship, but as a seal something to keep hidden what should never again see the light. These words were delivered in a flat tone, with no attempt to persuade or frighten, merely as part of a reality long accepted here, just as one accepts that rain will come in its season. And when the sky turned truly dark, everyone near the church knew they had to leave before the darkness grew too thick to pierce. Night wrapped the village in a heavy blanket, and in the midst of that darkness, the church stood like a frozen silhouette, seemingly untouched by the passage of time. No candlelight could be seen from the cracks of its cracked and clouded-stained glass windows, though some villagers swore they sometimes saw a faint flicker from within, like light reflecting off the surface of water. In the churchyard, the air felt different, colder than the air beyond the stone fence that surrounded it. The difference was not merely in temperature, but in sensation as, if standing in a room long sealed, for the scent of aged wood and dust blended into something hard to describe. Under the pale moonlight, tiny details on the stone walls became clear, half-eroded carvings of crosses, symbols with unfamiliar shapes, and fine lines that seemed to form an irregular pattern yet carried their own order when studied long enough. Occasionally, the faint sound of footsteps came from within, even though the main door and all windows were clearly locked. Those brave enough to press their ear against the door claimed to hear more than just steps, something like long, drawn breaths coming from deep inside, or perhaps merely trapped wind. No one could be certain. What was strange, however, was how time seemed to slow here. Some said that when they stood in the churchyard, the watches on their wrists stopped ticking for a few seconds before resuming again, as if halted by something unseen. The night moved on, yet around the church there seemed to be a different layer of time, one that made each second feel heavier, longer. And beneath the starlit sky, the building remained still, waiting, like a sentinel that had stood in the same place for centuries, guarding something the outside world was never meant to find again. The next morning, a thin mist descended upon the village. But around the church, the fog was thicker, almost like a white wall hanging low in the air. Villagers walking along the stone road near the church fence could only see a faint shadow of the building, like a painting faded by time. They never dared to walk too close when the fog was that thick. For it was said, the sounds inside became clearer, might one or not just footsteps or breathing, but whispers that seemed to call out names one by one. Some of the names belonged to those who had long been dead, making goosebumps rise and footsteps quicken away. Beyond the stone fence, grass grew wild up to the knee, and hidden among the blades were small headstones with no inscriptions, marked only by simple carvings resembling a cross or a circle. No one knew who was buried there, for even the village records made no mention of the graves. As the fog was slowly swept away by the morning wind, the church's form emerged more clearly, its heavy roof, a blackened wooden door, and the old bell in the tower that had never rung again. Some said the bell was last tolled on the night when the plague began claiming the villagers' lives. And since then, the bell rope had been cut and discarded somewhere unknown. However, a more chilling tale came from an old man who once worked cleaning the churchyard in his youth. He said that on a foggy morning like this, he saw the church door slightly ajar and someone standing in the doorway, wearing a long robe with their face hidden in shadow. The figure did not move, only stood there as if waiting for something. When the old man called out to them, the figure vanished instantly, and the door closed slowly without a sound. That afternoon, sunlight broke through the gaps in the clouds, casting long, swaying shadows of trees around the church. Yet, even with light flooding in, the atmosphere in the churchyard retained an uncanny quality, as if it was not entirely part of the same world as the surrounding village. The old stone fence drew a sharp boundary, as though an invisible line guarded the space between the living and a realm frozen in time. A black cat crossed the cobblestone path, its steps light, but upon reaching the rusted iron gate, it stopped, looked up toward the tower, then turned away as if sensing it should not be there. Inside, the church remained sealed shut. Tall windows with cracked stained glass reflected pale colors, and behind them, no movement or sign of life could be seen. It was said that on certain afternoons, when the sunlight entered at just the right angle, a long shadow could be seen passing inside the church, as though someone was walking from one side to the other. Those who had seen it swore that the shadow had no solid form, but was transparent, like smoke moving with a clear purpose. Some villagers believed it to be the spirit of the last priest who conducted Mass before the plague wiped out his congregation. Trapped between duty and the sudden arrival of death. They said the spirit paced over and over, perhaps searching for a prayer left unfinished, or perhaps waiting for a congregation that would never return. Meanwhile, the grass in the yard kept growing wild flowers blooming between the unmarked gravestones and the sound of wind passing through the tower's gaps. Sometimes resembled murmurs too faint to understand, making anyone who paused to listen feel that time in this place did not flow as it should. As evening approached, the light turned golden, casting the church tower's shadow long like a spear, piercing the ground in the yard. The sound of crows could be heard in the distance, yet strangely, none dared to perch on the roof or tower. As though there was an invisible boundary, even wild creatures refused to cross. In the village, people began closing their windows and doors, not out of fear of the night itself, but because they believed the air drifting from the church carried whispers no human was meant to hear. It was said that those who stayed outside too long at dusk would hear footsteps behind them, though when they turned, the street would be empty. There was the tale of an old farmer who once tried to prove it was all just superstition. He stood at the iron gate until the sky was completely dark. He claimed he felt nothing but a cold that pierced his bones. Yet the next night, he awoke with blood in his ears and a faint memory of a voice repeating his name from inside the locked church. Some considered it coincidence, but from that night on, the farmer never again dared to walk the road leading to the church, not even in daylight. Children in the village often dared each other to approach the stone fence, but most stopped after only a few steps, feeling as if the ground around it had grown heavier and harder to cross. Even the bravest would return with pale faces and eyes unwilling to meet anyone else's, as if keeping a secret too frightening to share. Meanwhile, the church stood silent, gazing out at the world from behind cracked windows, waiting for something no one ever explained, and no one truly wished to discover. In autumn, when thick fog began to descend from the hills and blanket the village like a damp shroud, the church seemed even more cut off from the outside world. The footsteps of anyone crossing the cobblestone road toward its iron gate would sound far louder than usual, as though each stone amplified the echo many times over. People rarely dared to approach when the fog thickened, for among the slow-moving white haze, the shape of the church's tower and roof appeared only faintly, like the silhouette of a building that no longer existed. There was a story from a shepherd who became lost on a foggy night while searching for his missing sheep. He claimed to hear a bell tolling softly from the direction of the church, even though everyone knew that the bell had been removed and stored in the village hall decades ago. The toll did not sound like an ordinary bell, but was heavy and deep, as if calling someone to come. The shepherd followed the sound until he stood directly before the massive wooden door, which was locked, and there he felt air far colder than the surroundings, as though wind seeped through the doors cracks, though logically, the door was sealed tight and could not let any air in or out. He gazed at the carvings on the door, noticing black stains creeping along the wood grain, resembling soot or char that had burned from within. When he touched it, his heart pounded not from heat, but from a cold so sharp it made his palm feel numb. He stepped back slowly, the fog swallowing him, and when he returned to the village, he never again spoke of that night, except for one sentence that the villagers always remembered. Not every door is meant to be opened, and not every call is worth answering. Winter brought a different kind of silence, as if the whole village held its breath, waiting for something that never arrived. Snow piled on the rooftops, wrapped around the cobblestone streets, and clung to the weathered wooden fences. The church, with its stiff, towering spire, looked like a massive forgotten stone statue, frozen between the fog and falling snowflakes. No one dared touch its door during this season, not only because of the biting cold, but also because of an old tale saying that in winter, the sounds from within the church were clearer. Some who walked nearby claimed to hear a low chant mixed with the dragging sound of chains scraping against the stone floor. A young man once tried to prove it was just imagination by standing near the iron fence until late at night. He stared at the tall windows sealed with thick, dusty glass, hoping to find a gap that could reveal its interior. But the longer he looked, the more he felt something staring back from the darkness behind the glass. A faint shadow appeared, moving slowly as if someone was walking inside. But its form was unclear, only darkness, pulsing in rhythm with the low chanting. The young man endured for several minutes before his steps retreated without his realizing it. And once home, he felt his knees weaken. When he told his story, his eyes were empty, as if still thinking about something he had left behind there. The villagers only nodded quietly, as if already understanding that the church had its own seasons. And winter was the time when its breath was heard most clearly. Inside the tightly locked church, dust and silence remained the only silent witnesses left. The old wood that once witnessed happiness and sorrow centuries ago now creaked softly whenever the night wind slipped through tiny cracks in the stone walls. The candlelight that once illuminated the altar was now replaced by a chilling darkness, as if enveloping all memories that ever existed. In one corner, the altar table with intricate carvings and faded cross motifs still stood firmly, though covered in layers of dust on every surface. Some stained glass fragments depicting the stories of saints and angels were cracked and shattered, showing how time had eroded the beauty of this church. Yet, there was something deeper, a presence that could not be explained by reason. Every time someone tried to open the church door, a coldness piercing down to the bone made them retreat without a word. Legend says the silver chalice kept on the main altar was the source of all the whispers heard from within. The chalice was not just an ordinary sacred object, but a relic believed to connect the human world with the spirits trapped between space and time. Anyone who touched it without pure intent would hear its deepest secrets, whispers that could disturb the soul until it could never rest again. History recorded that after the plague struck, the chalice was never used again, and the church was locked with special rituals by the last priests. To this day, no one truly knows what really happened because every record was lost or deliberately destroyed. Behind the locked church door, the silence seemed to hold endless bitter memories. Time appeared to stop when the plague struck, forcing the entire village to shut itself off and distance from the life they once knew. every corner of the church held traces of life that abruptly halted. The neatly arranged wooden chairs were now scattered, as if someone hurriedly left without saying goodbye. The majestic altar was silent without prayer, and the candle altar that used to be constantly lit slowly went out over time. The congregation that once filled the pews vanished one by one, leaving empty, cold spaces full of mystery. Beneath the church floor was a darker, gloomier basement where bodies were secretly buried during the plague. Hundreds of bones and skeletons lay scattered there, leaving a dense and indelible aura of sorrow. Some stories say that cries and wails can still be heard at night, blurring the boundaries between the living and the dead. No one dared to enter that basement except a few curious and brave souls seeking answers about what truly happened to the village that once lived with hope. Inside that dark space, there was the smell of wet earth and dampness mingling with eternal silence, creating an atmosphere that shakes the soul of anyone who hears it. The mystery surrounding that old church was not just about silence and a basement full of bones. There was a deeper story about secret rituals once performed there before the plague devoured the village's life. It was said that before everything changed, priests and village leaders held meetings in a secret room behind the altar. There, they tried to summon otherworldly powers, hoping to protect the village from the approaching disaster. Yet, what happened afterward remains a puzzle. Some old documents discovered later revealed notes about a dark pact made with something unseen. Whether it was a spirit, a supernatural entity, or an unknown natural force, no one really knows. The village allegedly became a kind of dark energy center, emanating from that ritual, possibly explaining why the plague spread so rapidly, wiping out nearly all its inhabitants. The night wind blowing around the church seemed to carry whispers from the past, tempting anyone brave enough to approach and delve deeper into the hidden secrets. The street lamps around the village had long been out, and ancient trees towered as if guarding the secret from exposure. The quiet atmosphere made anyone feel as if watched by something unseen, something waiting for the right moment to resurface. Nights in that vanished village were always shrouded in a thin mist, seemingly swallowing all forms of light and sound. Under the dark sky, only the shadows of giant trees slowly moved, following the rhythm of the cold and damp wind. The sound of unseen footsteps was occasionally heard, adding to the mysterious impression as if there was a creature constantly watching. Historians and researchers who had come to investigate this place noted that the atmosphere there was very different from anywhere else they had visited. There was an unexplainable energy, something that not only made people feel afraid, but also stirred a deep curiosity. They discovered small artifacts hidden among the ruins, such as beads made from dark-colored stones, tattered pieces of cloth, and rusty metal tools. Each object seemed to hold a story yet to be revealed. In a corner of a room, they found a nearly destroyed parchment scroll. The writing on it was faint and hard to read, but there were strange symbols reminiscent of ancient rituals. They hypothesized that the scroll might be a clue to what truly happened before the plague struck. Yet, whatever secret was contained within it remained tightly locked in silence, only to be unraveled by time, or by the courage of someone who could overcome their deepest fears. Morning in the vanished village left behind a damp aroma from dew clinging to leaves and grass. A thin mist still floated low over the ground, creating a delicate curtain that limited distant views. The atmosphere was silent, as if time had stopped moving there. The old houses, now collapsed, were neatly arranged like rows of silent corpses in eternal waiting. There was no sign of life, only the wind occasionally blowing, carrying mysterious whispers from the past. Among the ruins stood a well, now dry, but once believed to be the village's source of life. The well stood as a silent witness to all the suffering that had ever befallen. Archaeological research showed layers of soil containing strange chemical substances around the well, raising suspicion that there was an effort to hide something, or perhaps purify what had been contaminated. The local people, most of whom had left the place centuries ago, still believed the well was cursed. They thought its once clear water had turned into a source of relentless plague. In the village's silence, nature seemed to mourn as well. Birds hesitated to perch, and small animals avoided the quiet ruins. Nevertheless, the vanished village remained captivating, not only as a place of tragedy, but also as a mystery waiting to be solved by those brave enough to delve deeper into that dark past. Throughout the day, sunlight filtered through the ruins and wild-growing trees, creating shifting shadow patterns on the dusty ground. Behind every corner, there was a story never heard. Tales about the people who once lived here, living days full of hope, yet also fear. Farmers gripping rough hands on hoes, children running through green cornfields, mothers sewing by the fireplace, all now just faint shadows lost in the silence of time. Within those shadows, the wind seemed to whisper the names of the lost. Sounds unheard by ordinary ears, but felt by souls yearning to understand. In this vanished village, every fallen brick, every broken piece of wood seemed to hold memories waiting to be told. Exploring this village felt like entering a space between life and death, where time slowed and everything seemed to whisper secrets. At night, when the sky was dark and stars dim, some said a faint light appeared from the empty windows, as if signs from a past that had never truly left. Yet no one ever really knew what happened after the village was abandoned. The mystery covering this place remained shrouded like thick fog that never lifted, guarding secrets and stories left untold for centuries. As the sun began to set, the sky's colors shifted to orange and deep red. The village's atmosphere grew quieter and filled with lengthening shadows. The bird songs faded, replaced by the slow yet constant hum of the night. Among the ruins of houses, now reduced to their foundations, something felt as if time had stopped the moment the Black Death struck. Moss-covered walls told stories of lives once ordinary but suddenly halted for reasons unknown. One night, a brave traveler came to this village carrying a torch, trying to find traces of the past. He walked slowly among the ruins, feeling the cold air piercing his skin and the fading scent of damp earth. Each step echoed between the debris, as if reviving stories hidden in silence. The traveler found an old, nearly destroyed map, rolled and buried beneath a large stone near the village's former well. The map showed the village's boundaries and important places now hard to recognize. like a small church locked tight for centuries and a collapsed watchtower. Strange scribbles appeared on the map, seemingly codes or symbols yet to be deciphered. Here in this silent village, the mystery of the Black Death deepened. Some nearby villagers who still lived believed a force held time in this place, guarding secrets humans should never know. They avoided the village, especially after sunset, fearing what might still lurk in the shadows. Yet, like all unsolved mysteries, there was a pull calling seekers of truth and adventurers to try unveiling the veil, despite the great risks. The deepening night brought a strange calmness to this long-abandoned village. The night wind gently swept the ruins, as if erasing traces of the suffering that once took place there. Yet, behind the silence, rumors circulated among those living far from the village. Whispers faintly heard in the wind, stories of shadowy figures moving without bodies, and strange lights appearing behind the trees. Nearby villagers believed that the souls of those who died during the plague had not found peace, trapped between the real world and another realm. This was not just folklore passed down through generations, but also real accounts from people who had tried to visit the village at night, returning pale-faced and terrified. They told of footsteps following them in the dark, although no one else was around. Some claimed to see faint figures standing among the ruins, eyes gleaming and faces unrecognizable, seemingly waiting for something that never came. All these added layers of mystery, creating a vortex of time filled with secrets that logic struggled to unravel. In this atmosphere, a young archaeologist named Elias decided to come and investigate the truth behind all the stories. He brought advanced equipment, cameras, and audio recorders, hoping to capture something that might help understand what truly happened in the village during the Black Death. Elias knew the risks were great, but his passion for uncovering this mystery outweighed the fear that haunted many. Elias stepped cautiously through the remnants of old houses, dusty roads, and fields that had returned to dense forest. He observed every small detail that could tell the story of the life that once was. On the walls of the decaying buildings, traces of wooden carvings and faded paint remained, indicating this was once inhabited by hopeful people, even though the shadow of the plague haunted every corner. While recording the sounds of nature and his footsteps, Elias felt a subtle vibration that was hard to explain, like a whisper of energy lingering among the ruins. He began reading some old documents he brought, including church records and newspapers from that era recounting the plague chronicles. From these, he learned the village had once been a small trading center with friendly, hard-working inhabitants. However, when the plague struck, everything changed drastically. Houses emptied, children no longer played in the streets, and cheerful sounds were replaced by cries and suffering. The remaining villagers tried to hold on by performing religious rituals, hoping to drive away the disease, but to no avail. The illness spread quickly and unpredictably, claiming one life after another until the village fell into silence and ruin. Elias pondered how history and written stories could only faintly convey the real feelings and suffering endured back then. He wondered if anything remained in this village, not just physical ruins, but emotional traces still echoing, waiting to be heard once again. Behind the silence of this long-abandoned village, there remains a profound quietness filled with meaning. Night gently creeps in, bringing a bone-chilling cold, inviting the lingering souls to rest within the dark embrace. In a corner of the church, now covered with dust and cobwebs, Elias found an old table with several remaining objects. Among them were a half-melted candle, a small wooden cross, and an aged scroll that appeared to be a diary or a prayer written with trembling hands. As he slowly unrolled it, the scent of old paper and extinguished candle filled the cold air. The writing on the scroll told the story of a young priest present in the village during the plague as spread. He meticulously recorded each event, from the first symptoms to how the villagers began losing hope and faith. In his notes, the priest spoke of an internal struggle between faith and doubt, between hope and despair, a dilemma perhaps felt only by those living through such a time. Elias read, word by word, sensing the heavy burden carried by the priest and the uncertainty surrounding each passing day. This story painted a more humane picture of the plague, which is often reduced to mere numbers and statistics in history books. Elias continued to explore the neglected corners of the church, following the shadows dancing beneath the dim candlelight he carried. The atmosphere felt heavy, filled with silent sounds that only the most sensitive souls could hear. Behind a heavy wooden door, he found a small room that seemed to have once been a storage or isolation chamber. Inside were remnants such as dark-colored fabric scraps, small bottles containing liquids that had changed color, and several old books with leather covers that were beginning to peel. All of these seemed to hold untold stories, secrets tightly kept in silence for centuries. Elias imagined how the villagers of old must have faced this overwhelming fear. The sick were confined in rooms like this, isolated from an outside world, growing ever more frightening. The sounds of weeping, screams, and prayers might once have echoed against these walls. Yet now only silence cloaked the space. He tried to sense the presence of that past, allowing his imagination to fill the empty rooms with stories that might have happened. Without ever truly knowing whether they were real or merely illusions, as time passed slowly inside this old church, Elias felt as if he stood on the border between the real world and a world long gone. The night's darkness, the flickering candlelight, and the distinctive smell of dust formed an unforgettable atmosphere. Every second brought a mixed feeling of calm and restlessness, of hope and fear. He realized that behind this silence lay stories that would never be fully revealed, mysteries that remained hidden in the shadows of history. This was not just about the plague that claimed many lives, but also about how humans faced uncertainty, how they struggled to survive despite limitations, and how their stories became part of an invisible legacy yet alive in unspoken memory. Outside the tightly sealed church, the once bustling village seemed frozen in a suspended time. The narrow streets once filled with children's laughter and the busy chatter of residents now only echoed with silence and shadows of the past. The weathered wooden houses stood like mute witnesses, holding the scent of life that once filled every corner. There was an old well in the village center, where many villagers once drew water for their daily needs. That well now lay tightly covered, as if hiding secrets that must not be revealed. Around it, wild grasses and blooming flowers grew without care, adding a touch of beauty, contrasting the village's quietness. As the sun began to set and the sky turned a reddish-orange, long shadows stretched across the cobblestone paths. The breeze carried faint whispers, like voices from the past trying to reach the present world. This village, once the heart of life and joy, had transformed into a place filled with mystery and sorrow. Yet beneath all that lay a meaningful silence, a reminder of life's fragility and how swiftly time can erase human footprints. There, amidst the forgotten village, history and imagination met, forming a story never truly finished, still alive among the whispers of the wind and the rustling leaves. Entering the boundaries of this long-abandoned village, a hollow feeling enveloped the air, a silence that was not merely the absence of sound, but the absence of real life. The ancient trees surrounding the village seemed to bow their heads as if mourning the fate that befell its inhabitants. Leaves fell slowly, covering footprints that once ran joyfully, chasing dreams and hopes. Each deserted house held untold stories, tales of people struggling against a cruel fate. Inside the ruins of some buildings, remnants of furniture, rusty and scattered, added a somber and mysterious atmosphere. There stood a wooden table still upright, though cracked in places, signifying that in the past, families gathered there to share meals and stories before nightfall. Now, that table became a silent witness to the loss of happiness and warmth. Nearby, an old swing swayed gently in the breeze, its rusty chains creaking softly, as if recalling the laughter of children who never returned. The sun, sinking lower toward the western horizon, cast a faint golden light that wrapped the village in a bittersweet warmth. Under a cloudy sky, the shadows of buildings and trees intertwined in irregular patterns, signaling that although life had departed, memories and secrets of the village remained alive, hidden beyond time and space. The story of the village that vanished overnight during the Black Death was not just a legend, but a warning about the power of nature and the fragility of humanity, which even in deepest silence left an everlasting echo. As the night deepened, the quiet village began to reveal layers of mystery long hidden behind the ruins and trees. There were faint whispers occasionally heard, like held breaths or sighs of the wind carrying old stories from the past. In that silence, faint shadows moved slowly, as if unseen beings still inhabited the places abandoned by humans. Historians and researchers who had come to explore tried to uncover the village's secrets, discovering ancient records that mentioned strange rituals performed before the plague arrived. Rituals said to protect the village, but instead attracted a greater calamity. Large stones forming a circle in the forest around the village were believed to be an ancient altar where prayers and sacrifices were made. The atmosphere around this altar felt different. The wind blew colder and heavier, carrying a difficult-to-describe scent, a mix of wet earth and something darker. Locals sometimes saw strange lights at night, flickering among the trees, yet no one dared approach to confirm their source. In the silence of this forgotten village, the mystery thickened, and every corner seemed to hold questions unanswered about the fate and meaning of everything that happened when the plague struck. As dawn began to break on the eastern horizon, a soft light swept over the village ruins, awakening forgotten shadows of the past. A thin mist drifting among the trees slowly dissipated, leaving the air fresh yet filled with a poignant sense of mystery. Amid the ruins of the old church, there stood a stone altar that remained intact despite the passage of time. On that altar, delicate carvings depicted unfamiliar symbols, like a secret language understood only by those who had lived through those dark times. Some ancient notes discovered by archaeologists mention that this altar was the center of spirit summoning ceremonies, where villagers hoped to gain protection from the raging plague. Yet, whispers told that the ritual did not go as planned, instead opening a door to another world, inviting entities that brought death and destruction. Meanwhile, among the collapsed houses, personal belongings were found left behind, such as a silver ring still gleaming amid the dust, a diary with pages beginning to fade, and a small clay statue believed by legend to be the village's guardian. All these items stood as silent witnesses to the life that once was and vanished mysteriously, leaving unanswered questions for anyone who came seeking traces of the past. The sun climbing higher revealed every corner of the ruins, unveiling small details that had long been hidden in the darkness of time. Among the crumbled bricks and rotted wood, faint footprints were visible in the damp earth. These were not ordinary human footprints. They appeared smaller and moved in patterns unfamiliar, like a dance understood only by the wind and shadows. Visitors tracing this site often felt the presence of something unseen, a subtle energy seeping into consciousness, awakening both fear and curiosity. Some modern researchers suggest this phenomenon could be a result of collective trauma imprinted in the place, a psychological trace still echoing from the sorrow and loss once experienced. Yet, on the other hand, local folklore tells of this village as a resting place for wandering spirits, who never found peace after their sudden departure. They roam in the silence of the night, crossing the ruins, now silent witnesses to a tragedy that never ends. Every night, faint sounds can be heard, whispers and laments, left from the past, making anyone who listens to become absorbed in the endless tale of grief. Among the ruins, an old building still stood proudly, though most of its walls had collapsed. This building was once known as the village church, a place where villagers gathered to pray and seek comfort amid the turmoil of the plague. Its architecture was simple, yet filled with intricate symbolism. From cross carvings etched into the wood to small windows that refracted sunlight into soft colors. The church held secrets not widely known, such as ancient notes hidden behind the altar, and a painting said to depict the face of a priest who mysteriously disappeared at the height of the plague. Some eyewitnesses who had seen the painting said the priest's gaze seemed to follow every movement of visitors, evoking a strange feeling hard to explain. Additionally, in the church's basement lay tightly locked wooden chests, said to contain sacred relics and valuables never removed since that time. This church's mystery made it a focal point for historians and researchers, who continuously try to uncover what truly transpired behind its thick walls and crumbling stones. The atmosphere surrounding the old church evokes feelings difficult to describe in words. Imagine a building locked for 300 years, standing tall amidst the ruins of a village once ravaged by the Black Death, silently witnessing the cruelty of history. The cold, damp air envelops every corner of the church, mingling the scent of decaying wood with the earthy aroma of wet soil from the graves in the front yard. Tall trees and dry branches brushing against each other in the wind add to the mystical aura and profound silence surrounding the place. During the day, sunlight only manages to penetrate through the narrow cracks in the windows, casting faint shadows that slowly move along the cracked and moss-covered stone walls. When night falls, darkness swallows all light, leaving only the sound of the wind, as if the church whispers to the souls trapped within its history. The surrounding community has many stories about this church, often told in hushed and respectful tones. They believe that the church is not just a place of worship, but a spiritual prison holding dark secrets that must never be revealed. There is a legend about a priest who once served there, mysteriously disappearing during the plague. It is said he performed secret rituals that cursed the church. The village elders also tell of strange sounds sometimes heard from inside the church on quiet nights, sounds resembling liturgical chants mixed with mournful cries. There are also stories of red lights occasionally dancing behind the windows, as if signaling that something unseen still lives within. Besides folklore, historical records suggest the church indeed endured dark times poorly documented. Old documents from a nearby monastery mention that after the Black Death struck the village, the church was locked and abandoned without clear explanation. No one dared to enter for centuries, leaving the building to slowly decay amid the vanished village ruins. Modern archaeological excavations around the church uncovered strange artifacts, such as objects seemingly out of their time. There were parchments with unreadable writings, small, eerie statues, and tools suspected to be used for ancient rituals. All these findings add layers to the mystery surrounding the church, making it even more compelling to study. Imagining daily life in the village before the plague evokes a picture of a simple community, rich with traditions and strong rituals. The inhabitants relied on farming and handicrafts, living in harmony with nature and time. Every Sunday, they gathered at the church to pray, listen to sermons, and share news. Yet beneath this peaceful routine, there was a hidden fear of disease spreading from neighboring villages. When the plague finally arrived, life changed drastically. Many fell ill and died within days, leaving families bewildered and grief-stricken. The church became the center of mass burial efforts, and eventually, a place meant to be a source of hope and peace turned into a symbol of death and destruction. Through the long silence, the church remained standing firm, bearing the weight of time and a painful history. It became a monument for those lost without trace and a witness to unheard stories. But what exactly lies behind the tightly closed church doors? Is there truly a dark power surrounding the building? Or is it merely human imagination weaving these tales? We can only ask and reflect, letting this mystery flow like an endless river of time, inviting us to keep searching, understanding, and perhaps one day uncovering the truth. As the night deepens and a thin mist begins to envelop the ruins around the church, the atmosphere grows even quieter and more serene. Imagine the cold air piercing down to the bones, each gust of wind carrying faint sounds reminiscent of ancient whispers from the past. The path, once bustling with villagers' footsteps, is now covered with moss and dry leaves, as if time itself has stopped spinning in that place. Here and there, the ruins of houses with collapsed walls and broken roofs paint a picture of how devastatingly the plague took lives. Yet, amidst this destruction, the church stands firm, like the last fortress holding all memories, secrets, and unspoken sufferings. In the darkness of night, shadows from towering trees seem to dance with the rhythm of the wind. The twinkling stars in the sky bear silent witness to a place filled with mysteries and unresolved stories. Perhaps this is where lost souls wander, seeking a peace they never found in life. Meanwhile, some of the surviving villagers gaze at the church with a mixture of fear and respect, aware that something greater than themselves is hidden behind those old stone walls. They keep their distance, daring not to approach, allowing the church to remain a puzzle waiting to be unraveled by future generations. Modern research with advanced technology tries to lift the veil of mystery surrounding the church. Scientists and historians dig into old archives and conduct excavations around the site, hoping to find clues that explain what truly happened. However, the deeper they investigate, the more questions arise. Like an endless labyrinth, the mystery of this church invites truth seekers to trace every footprint, artifact, and remaining record. Some believe the secret key lies within ancient symbols carved into the walls, while others think the real story is hidden in oral traditions long forgotten by time. Thus, the church locked for 3 centuries becomes more than just a physical building. It is a window to a past filled with doubt and uncertainty, where fact and imagination intertwine, creating a story that lives on in the shadows of time. As we close our eyes and let our minds drift there, it feels like an invitation to enter another world, a world where every step brings us closer to hidden secrets, yet keeps us within a warm, calm peace. It is an invitation to reflect, to feel, and to accept that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, so that we may continue dreaming and questioning. The sun begins to peek over the horizon, casting a gentle light over the ruins of the church and the forgotten village. The tranquil morning atmosphere brings a new sense of hope, even though the dark shadows of the past still linger in every corner. Amidst the silent debris, the sounds of nature slowly awaken. Birdsong, the whisper of the wind, and the rustling of leaves, as if soothing the souls trapped in time. We can imagine how once, on a similar morning, life in that village flowed with a simple yet meaningful rhythm. Children ran between stone houses, farmers prepared their fields, and priests arranged prayers inside the church that has now been locked for centuries. Yet beneath the calm of that morning, a mystery still hangs, waiting to be unveiled. Some surviving villagers tell stories of strange lights emanating from inside the church on certain nights, or whispers heard among the ruins when the wind blows fiercely. These stories are echoes from the past, refusing to vanish, reinforcing the mystical aura surrounding the place. Historians and researchers continue to wonder if these strange occurrences are connected to the Black Death that struck, and why the church was then sealed shut for 3 centuries with no one daring to open it. As time passed and generations changed, the village faded further from the outside world's memory. But for those who witnessed and felt the presence of the place, the locked church remains a symbol of an unspeakable tragedy and an enduring mystery. We are invited to let our minds wander, to feel the soft vibrations of a past full of riddles, while enjoying the calming stillness. Because behind it all lies a lesson about life and death, hope and fear, which may never be fully explained, but can always be felt in the quiet stillness of a silent night. As night slowly covers the sky with its thick, dark blanket, we return to the same silence as when this story began. The locked church now stands as a silent witness, watching over a village once bustling, now reduced to shadows and whispers. In its quietness, the church seems to whisper a tale never truly finished, an old song repeating endlessly. Imagine how the night wind carries faint sounds from the past, breathing stories of lost lives, fading hopes, and secrets hidden beneath the ruins. No one truly knows what happened behind that wooden door, and perhaps that is the charm that keeps it alive in collective memory. The mystery does not need to be answered, but felt. Let it flow with your night's sleep, carrying you into a realm of dreams filled with vague images and unanswered questions. Like a gentle and mysterious lullaby, this story leads us into deep calmness, inviting the soul to rest from worldly anxieties. Perhaps therein lies the beauty of an unfinished story, making us continue to wonder and dream, even as our eyes close. A reminder that within every hidden secret, there is a silence calling to be heard. And within every dark night, there is hope for a new dawn. With a slow flowing final sentence, let us close this story with a warm melancholy, letting the mystery linger in the air like distant twinkling stars. Because in this world, not all answers need to be found. Sometimes happiness lies in the beauty of unanswered questions. Rest well, and let this story be a gentle solace, accompanying you until you fall peacefully asleep.